Imagine you decide to start a fast, but you have different goals today than you did even last week. You want to fast for a different purpose. Well, what you eat prior to starting a fast drastically paves what happens during the fast. We're going to cover specifically what you can eat to kickstart your fast in a specific way, and I'll also clue you in with some things that you can consume during your fast that might help specific goals. For example, things like fat loss, things like longevity, things like improving sleep. We're going to cover these things because how you start your fast makes a huge difference. In just a couple of minutes, I'm going to share a different way that you can start a fast that's actually going to make it a little bit harder, but it could get you a little bit more fat loss. So we'll talk about that one in a second. It might make the fast harder, but it does definitely amplify things. I'm also going to share something really interesting that I just experimented with about a month ago when I was filming with George St. Pierre, the UFC champion, and we were doing a longer fast. It's a way to start a fast that changes everything. I had exponentially more fat loss with it, and I'm excited to share. But I'll talk about that as we get a little further in, so we get the basics first, and then move into more advanced tactics. Today, I want to walk you through three main things. First, how your pre-fast meal really determines how easy or difficult the fast feels. Secondly, what you can do during a fast if hunger shows up, because there are a couple of little supplements or spices that can enhance fat loss without breaking the fast. And then finally, I'm going to talk about what you can use right before breaking a fast to actually avoid crashes and that energy dip you sometimes feel after fasting. Now, before we get into the specifics, I put a link down below for a symbiotic called Seed. It's a prebiotic and a probiotic in one capsule. It all starts in the gut. One of the reasons we feel so good when we're fasting is because our gut becomes less inflamed, and part of that has to do with the gut microbiome composition. So I've popped a link down below for Seed's Daily Symbiotic. It's probably one of the most important supplements you could have alongside a fasting regimen. Go ahead and click that link after this video to check them out and claim your 20% off. Now let's start with the overall big idea. What you eat before a fast doesn't decide whether you're fasting. It decides how your body responds once the food is gone. Because the assumption most people make is that fasting starts as soon as the food stops. And in a lot of ways, that is the case. But physiologically, that's not necessarily true, because your hunger, your energy, your cravings during a fast are all heavily influenced by the signals that you set up beforehand. We're talking about satiety hormones, digestion speed, and blood sugar stability. So really, instead of asking, how do I push through a fast, the better question is, how do I make this easier to maintain for my specific goals? That brings us to the foundation, which is what to eat before a fast so you're actually satiated. Let's start with protein, because this really is the anchor. There was a study in obesity that looked at overweight and obese men consuming either a normal protein diet or a higher protein diet with calories held completely consistent. What they found was really simple, but also really powerful. Higher protein intake led to greater fullness throughout the day, regardless of how often they ate. This is what's important with fasting, because mechanistically, this happens through increases in hormones like peptide YY, which acts in the hypothalamus to suppress appetite. What that really tells us is that protein is quieting hunger signals before the fast even begins, which doesn't impact your fast negatively, it just makes the fast easier. It also slows down how quickly food leaves the stomach, which really matters for satiety. The type of protein matters too, and can make a big difference. There was a review in Advances in Nutrition that showed that whey protein tends to be more satiating in the short term, while casein protein is more satiating over longer periods. Whey protein digests faster and stimulates satiety hormones very quickly, whereas casein digests more slowly and forms a gel-like structure in the stomach that delays gastric emptying. So, if you're eating before a fast, especially in the evening, slower digesting proteins will often work better. Something like a milk protein instead of a whey protein, or literally even just drinking a glass of milk. Believe it or not, milk ranks higher than many other proteins in terms of digestible amino acid score, satiety, and actual muscle anabolism. Milk protein is one of the most powerful proteins you could consume. Now let's talk about fats and how you can incorporate different types into your diet for a specific change. Fats matter not because of the calories, but because of how they behave during digestion. Medium chain triglycerides, or MCTs, are especially interesting here. There was a study published in Nutrients that compared meals containing MCT oil versus long chain fats. They tracked hunger, gastric emptying, and later food intake. What they found was that MCTs delayed gastric emptying and ultimately led to lower food intake later in the day, which is interesting because MCTs actually digest quickly. They're rapidly sent to the liver and converted into ketones. That's why it works. They digest fast, but they turn into an alternative energy source very quickly. What that means is that MCTs smooth that energy gap that shows up once food is gone. There's a gap between when you stop eating and when your body shifts gears into a different fuel source. And MCTs help bridge that. Omega-3s play a huge role here too. I was just filming with Dr. Rhonda Patrick, and we were talking about omega-3s. They work in a different way. We have to look at some animal research, but it's interesting because research published in the American Journal of Physiology showed that fish oil increased leptin and adiponectin levels, both hormones involved in appetite regulation and insulin sensitivity. So while it doesn't mean that omega-3s directly stop hunger, they improve insulin sensitivity and reduce the inflammation that makes appetite signals more reliable rather than distorted. Think of it as setting the hormonal environment, not forcing an outcome. Now, before we move on to the next thing you can eat before a fast, I promised you something you can use during a fast. MCT oil during a fast is acceptable if you want it to be. It does count as calories, but it also provides energy. You have to weigh this out. There is evidence that olive oil, MCT oil, and exogenous ketones can actually enhance the effects of a fast from a true cellular perspective. So even though you're consuming calories, what you gain in terms of mental acuity and ability to maintain the fast probably outweighs it. Olive oil fasting is something I did a full video on, and it's one of the most powerful things you can do, giving you a boost from compounds like hydroxytyrosol and other antioxidants in olive oil that do significant things at the cellular level. One other thing you can do if you don't want to have fats during your fast is use Mediterranean spices. Oregano, thyme, sage, rosemary. Even though there are negligible calories in a little bit of these herbs, you can muddle them into some tea. These Mediterranean spices activate something called PPAR-alpha, which actually helps the body shift into a fat-burning state more effectively. This is legit. It changes things at a cellular level through a nuclear receptor protein. It's not small-scale stuff either. There's good evidence on this. So yes, you could say there's half a calorie in that, but you could also say that about green tea or coffee. I would say add some Mediterranean spices during your fast to enhance fat loss. Kind of a cool little trick. Now we need to talk more about how to set up your fast, because fiber is very interesting. Soluble fiber specifically, before going into a fast, especially something called psyllium husk, does a few really useful things. A large meta-analysis published in BMC Endocrine Disorders showed that psyllium intake improved fasting blood sugar, insulin resistance, and overall glycemic control. Mechanistically, psyllium slows down carb digestion, which leads to greater stimulation of GLP-1, the hormone that increases fullness and reduces appetite. Physically, psyllium forms a gel in the gut that increases satiety without adding calories. It also helps expedite the removal of microplastics, which a lot of people want to fast for when they're focused on detoxification effects. Then there's something even simpler, which is just your eating speed. There was a study in the International Journal of Behavioral Nutrition and Physical Activity that found that eating more slowly didn't change how full people felt immediately, but it did an hour later. Hunger was massively lower at that point. All these things are super important for fasting because what is the most important part of fasting? Consistently remaining in the fast. Don't break it early, don't cheat it. These things may sound small, but they're going to help you lose more fat, get your hormones under control, and modulate insulin resistance because they help you stick to it. Slower eating increases the mechanical distension of the gut and gives satiety hormones time to respond. When the body actually has time to register the meal, everything works better. Let me give you a good example of a pre-fast meal. And this isn't something you need to follow to the letter. It's just an option to put things into context. One approach could be a lean protein, like chicken or lean beef, paired with a high soluble fiber vegetable, like Brussels sprouts, and maybe some chia seeds or flax, with a small amount of MCT drizzled on top. Keep the carbohydrates to a minimum going into a fast. No need to have carbs, it just puts you on a blood sugar roller coaster. I also recommend having some milk protein, so something like a whey protein concentrate over a whey protein isolate or a casein protein. Casein might actually work well in this case. You could flat out have cottage cheese or Greek yogurt with some chia seeds or flax. That way you're getting the protein, the fiber, the slower digestion, and the dairy fat, which has positive impacts. And it actually tastes pretty good. You could also go with salmon, though good wild-caught salmon is getting harder and harder to find at a reasonable price. And most farm-raised options I'm not a huge fan of. But you do get those omega-3s, so if you're not having salmon, have a couple tablespoons of MCT oil or a couple of fish oil capsules. In this case, you actually want to lean a little more toward EPA rather than just DHA, and go for a fish oil that's in triglyceride form rather than ethyl ester form. You can also just mix psyllium husk into water and have that as a separate drink to slow everything down. The point isn't stacking everything. It's choosing foods that keep hunger calm instead of making you want to eat again an hour or two later, because that's going to be the biggest problem you face. More than anything, it's going to be finishing that meal, going to bed, waking up hungry, and feeling like you have a mountain of torture in front of you. Now that the fast is set up properly, let's talk about what to do if hunger still shows up while you're fasting. There was a study published in Nutrients that looked at light activity after meals and found that gentle movement for 35 to 45 minutes after eating improved post-meal blood sugar control. Better glucose stability in the evening means fewer cravings later. When you're heading into a fast, stabilizing that is probably the most important thing. After a meal, glucose is moving from the bloodstream right into the tissues, and a little bit of movement is going to help muscle glucose uptake through both insulin-independent and insulin-dependent pathways, meaning muscles can pull glucose in even without a big insulin spike. You don't need a bunch of carbs. You don't need the insulin. And what that means is that you're going to clear glucose a lot more smoothly, avoiding that sharp rise followed by a drop. That reduces late-night hunger, and more importantly, the hunger that shows up in the morning when you don't want it. If your blood sugar is more stable the night before, you're not starting the fast from a place of volatility. Walking is also great during a fast, but when you time it, things get interesting. If your last meal was the night before, then when you wake up fasted, a walk in the morning becomes really important, especially in morning light. There was a study in Obesity Facts that found that morning bright light exposure reduced appetite and body fat in overweight people. Then there was another study in the International Journal of Endocrinology that dug into the mechanism and showed that morning light exposure, especially combined with walking, increased leptin, the hormone that signals energy sufficiency, and decreased ghrelin, the hormone released by the stomach that drives hunger. So you're not just burning calories on that walk, you're influencing the hormonal signals that tell your brain whether it's time to eat or not. Morning light anchors your circadian rhythms, which in turn align your appetite signals with the time of day you're actually supposed to be eating. A fasted morning walk is doing double duty. You're getting the movement for glucose handling and energy regulation, and you have the light calming the hunger signals. This is especially important if you didn't sleep well the night before, which can happen when you're getting used to fasting. If you wake up feeling a little off or hungry, that simple combo of walking and morning light can often just end that. During the fast itself, coffee and tea are extremely useful, but not really for the reason that most people think. There was a randomized, double-blinded crossover trial in Nutrients that looked at the effects of consuming green tea catechins combined with coffee chlorogenic acids over a number of weeks. What they found is that it wasn't really the caffeine impacting the fast so much as it was the combination of those compounds that increased GLP-1 levels, improved glucose control, and made people more insulin sensitive. The polyphenols in coffee and tea interact with the gut, mainly the enteroendocrine cells, and influence things like GLP-1, which slows gastric emptying, improves glucose handling, and makes you feel fuller. But here's the really important distinction. These compounds don't blunt appetite by forcing hunger down. What they're really doing is reducing the blood sugar volatility that drives cravings. The reason we feel so good when we fast is that our inflammation is lower and our blood sugar is stable. When glucose spikes hard and then drops, the brain interprets that drop as an energy emergency, even if calories are adequate. So by smoothing that curve, coffee and tea make the fast feel calmer, not more stimulating. That's the paradox. They actually calm things down. During a fast, they help with adherence, not really willpower. Now, we can also talk about supplements that operate at a different level. For people who want to take their fasting further, compounds like yohimbine and rauwolcinine are potent. They don't work by smoothing hunger signals. They push the sympathetic nervous system. You may want to test these carefully to make sure you don't experience anxiety from them, because what they do is act as alpha-2 adrenergic receptor antagonists. These alpha-2 receptors normally act like brakes. When epinephrine is released, alpha-2 receptors signal the system to slow further release down. When you block those receptors, that braking system is removed. As a result, epinephrine and norepinephrine rise. When we're fasting, this is already happening to some degree, and higher norepinephrine does two really important things. First, it increases the activation of beta-adrenergic receptors, which drives lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat into usable fatty acids and glycerol. Second, that same increase in sympathetic tone and lipolysis reduces appetite, mainly in individuals who are more sensitive to adrenergic signaling, which is a lot of people. We see this very clearly in the research. There's an early study in pharmacology, biochemistry, and behavior that looked at yohimbine and rauwolcinine in lean and obese mice. Both compounds reduced short-term food intake, but the effect was a lot stronger in the obese animals, which is important because it suggests that appetite suppression isn't just about calories. It's about how responsive the nervous system is to norepinephrine. We see similar effects in humans. A study in Research in Sports Medicine gave highly trained soccer players 20 milligrams of yohimbine every day for 3 weeks. The yohimbine group saw a significant reduction in body fat percentage and fat mass, but had no changes in muscle mass and, importantly for them, no changes in exercise performance. Another human study in the European Journal of Clinical Investigation showed that oral yohimbine actually increased plasma-free fatty acids and glycerol, which are direct markers of lipolysis. So it's not just helping release fat. It's shifting the body into a higher adrenergic, higher stimulation, higher fat-burning mode. Because the same mechanism that mobilizes fat is also the mechanism that can make people feel wired or anxious. So you have to be really careful. While yohimbine and rauwolcinine can blunt appetite and increase fat mobilization, they do so by pushing the system, not stabilizing it. They're not required for fasting success. They're totally situational and rather advanced. Coffee and tea are going to help smooth blood sugar and appetite signals, whereas these compounds are amplifying stimulation. Both approaches exist, but they operate very differently. Before I get into what you might want to do prior to breaking a fast, let me give you a different way that you can start a fast that might help you burn a lot more fat, but it is aggressive. It's called protein-sparing modified fasting. What you'd want to do for the 2 meals leading up to your actual fast is follow what's called PSMF. In simple terms, this is very low fat, very high protein, practically no carbs. You're basically eating lean meat. It sounds rough, and it is what Dr. Ted Naiman has talked about a lot. It's very potent. In the scientific literature, it's literally called rabbit starvation because of how extreme the fat and carb restriction is. I'm not saying you do it for long periods of time, but it will make you very hungry during your fast. However, you are starting the fat loss process essentially 2 meals earlier without actually not eating. For the 4, 5, 6, or 10 hours before a fast, you're already essentially in a fasted-like metabolic state. I actually did this with my last fast when I went up to visit George St. Pierre in Montreal to film a 3-day fast with him. I thought, I want to amplify this. So the 2 meals prior to starting my fast, I did protein-sparing modified fasting. Non-fat Greek yogurt, chicken breast, some deli meat, 96% lean ground beef that I actually drained to make it even leaner. I was hungry the next day, which almost never happens to me on day 1 of a fast, since I'm pretty experienced with it. But after 24 hours, I was like, oh my gosh, I've already leaned out so much. By 48 hours in, the hunger was gone, and the results from that 72-hour fast were so much more powerful than usual. So this is a fun little hack if you're a little more advanced. Now let's talk about what you can do shortly before breaking a fast, around 30 minutes out. Cinnamon can be a very useful tool here. It helps with the metabolic transition. After you've gone without food for a while, your body is in a different state. Insulin sensitivity is high, glucose transporters are responsive, and the way nutrients are handled can either feel really smooth or sometimes quite jarring. Cinnamon helps because it contains a polyphenol called methyl hydroxychalcone polymer, or MHCP, which has insulin mimetic properties. It's helping insulin do its job more efficiently. Both cell culture and human studies published in Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism and the Journal of the Endocrine Society showed that cinnamon improved glucose tolerance, enhanced GLUT4 translocation and glucose uptake, and reduced the overall blood glucose response to carbohydrates. So when you take cinnamon shortly before breaking a fast, especially if carbs are going to be involved, you're basically helping glucose move into muscle more efficiently, instead of lingering in the bloodstream. Sharp glucose spikes after fasting can be problematic if they're not controlled. A small spike from maybe 15 grams of carbs is fine, but a massive 50 to 60 gram rapid carbohydrate load, followed by an insulin spike, and then a blood sugar drop, will have your brain signaling an emergency, and you'll overeat and undo the fast. Cinnamon isn't blocking the carbs so much as it's helping manage that transition. For longer fasts, adding bone broth alongside cinnamon gives you another layer of support. During a fast, your digestion is downshifting significantly. Enzyme production slows, gut motility changes, and the mucosal layer of the gut actually thins out because there's simply less need for barrier protection. That's a normal adaptation. Bone broth addresses this because it's liquid, low residue, and easy to digest at a time when the gut is just waking back up. It's also providing amino acids, mainly glutamine, which plays a really important role for the intestinal barrier. I just talked to Rhonda Patrick about this. Glutamine is important for the cells lining the gut. You have less epithelial cell stress, you support mucosal repair, and you maintain gut immune balance, which is again really important after the stress of a fast. Bone broth also contains gelatin and collagen, which are hydrophilic compounds that attract water and help with digestive juices, giving you smoother digestion and helping protect the gut lining as you reintroduce food. Instead of shocking the system with a complex meal full of different ingredients, bone broth acts as a buffer. Your digestive system gets something it can handle while it's signaling that food is coming back. So cinnamon is going to help manage blood sugar and insulin signaling if you're going to have carbs, and bone broth is going to help support digestion and gut integrity. This is really just a ramp-up of the system beforehand. Neither one is mandatory, but they help make breaking a fast feel more intentional, and honestly, it just feels better. Now, you're probably wondering how to actually break a fast without undoing all the work you just did. I put together a video that talks about how I'm breaking a fast in 2026. Some things have changed. There are some structural changes, a few ingredient changes, and some timing things that I think are going to make things a lot better.